You're listening to the Mythcreants Podcast with your hosts, Oren Ashkenazi, Chris Winkle, and Bunny.
There was a castle by a waterfall with a pink and purple wall and a princess living there. She had no parents and was all alone. She got by on her own and she liked it pretty well. 'Cause she never wore socks. She had a pet snake. She bought a red guitar and she ate a whole cake. And there wasn't anybody there to tell her what to do, so she did what she wanted to. Everybody knew the story of the princess who saved herself.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Mythcreants Podcast. I'm Bunny, and with me is...
Oren.
And...
Chris.
And so, recently I found out that we've been doing podcasts wrong, or rather we've been thinking about them wrong, or perhaps we haven't been a podcast at all because we've been doing it the wrong way.
Oh.
There's actually an easier way, and all podcasts throughout time, and indeed all conversations throughout time, analog or not, have followed this structure. If they hadn't, they wouldn't be conversations.
Ooh,
The monopod.
that sounds so deep and meaningful. Really, it's a guide to life.
Yes, precisely, and there's a number of very clear, specific, and easy to follow steps. First, we start the podcast.
Wow, that's great.
Yes, it's not called an intro, though.
No.
It's called auditory birth.
Oh, God. Oh, no.
Oh, man. Okay.
And even if it's not the very first episode of the podcast, or if we're not babies, don't worry, it's still called auditory birth because it's symbolic.
Oh, it's a metaphor. Okay. It's all making sense now.
Yeah, it's arisen from the collective unconscious.
Exactly. And now, to make your podcast a best listener, Chris will state our theme at 3 minutes. At minute 15, we will lapse into a terrible depression. Then Oren and I will argue and reconcile by minute 27 using a polarity realignment.
This is really optimistic about how long we can restrain ourselves on the opening bit, right? Like, those have just been getting longer and longer as the podcast has gone on.
Look, we'll hit minute 3 and then Chris can state what the podcast is about if you haven't looked at the title yet. But after minute 27, the podcast is basically over and it's free for all, and we can talk about what we ate for dinner.
That's when we return with the lesson of the podcast to give to all.
The audio elixir, as it were.
Yeah.
The audio elixir.
And then we experience podcast death.
So, okay, though, hopefully that one will just be metaphorical death.
It's a cycle that all podcasts and conversations go through. And, another fun fact, all podcasts are motivated by desire for sex or fear of death. Because, podcasters get laid constantly.
It's just the most sexually charged profession, if you think about it. God damn it.
They really do make you think.
Blake Snyder. All right, we should that one's a little specific. We should probably reference where that's from.
Yeah, that is Save the Cat, I believe.
Excuse me, but I believe it is time for me to state the theme.
Yes, Chris, what is this podcast about?
It is about pseudo-structures.
Yes.
Deep ones that are symbolic of regular structures. That are symbolic of pseudo-structures.
And now we are rising.
Oh, sorry, but yes. I should probably tell people what that is. Since it is actually a relatively new term that I made up. Because I can't stop making up terms.
That's just what we do. We make up terms, that's our thing, okay? Don't try to censor us.
We are so good at making up terms that we have all the candy.
So yeah, these are basically things that are advertised as story structures, but they don't represent what a real plot structure does, and they don't really teach people plotting. A lot of times they're popular because people are looking for fun, easy steps, and coming up with ideas is hard, and real, storytelling is so dependent on all of these factors, and it's complicated. But it's so easy if somebody just tells you step 1, do this, step 2, do this. And they have various tricks that we can talk about to make themselves seem more legitimate. And there's a blurry line, right, between what, because sometimes something that really seems like a pseudostructure, I know that the writer does have like a gut level understanding of how stories work, but is just so bad at expressing it that it basically becomes a pseudostructure. So what is and what isn't can be kind of blurry, but basically a real structure should actually tell you how to structure your plot in like a meaningful way and not just give you fixed points that seem easy and you do them and then you don't actually get a good story out of them.
Right, and so some of these are things like Save the Cat, 3-act structure, Hero's Journey, Kisho Tenketsu, The Virgin's Promise. There's so many of them. And some of them are pretty vague and relatively harmless. They won't really help, but they're not super likely to sabotage your story either. And then some of them are weirdly specific. But they all have one thing in common, which is that they are telling you things that could be in a story. They're not telling you what actually needs to be there. And sometimes the things they tell you could be there are just bad ideas. Just, you should not do that.
They seem to be both universalist and prescriptivist, depending on the scale you look at them and like how they're being sold to you. So like universal claims are things like the monomyth, where it's like every story falls into this structure.
Right.
This pre-existing structure. And then prescriptive, the ones that are more prescriptive are things like Save the Cat, which are like geared toward writing advice. But all of them have elements of universal and prescriptive. At least if they're, writing advice, because they're usually pulling on things like the monomyth. And yes, it's circular logic.
Yeah, I mean, Save the Cat, both Snyder's version and Brody's version, both claim that basically all stories do this. Which is hilarious, because clearly many of them don't, and so sometimes, like, Snyder doesn't even seem aware of this contradiction, and just, like, all movies do this, except movies I don't like, they don't do it. Which is, like,
Right, it's every story falls into the hero's journey, and what defines a story? It's something that falls into the hero's journey.
Yeah.
And Story Circle, which I hadn't heard about until I started researching this episode, says this explicitly. You can apply the story circle to any story. What makes a story something that the story circle can be applied to?
That's nice. That's a nice story circular definition.
That's true. It's meta.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if you can't identify real story structure, right, then you're caught in this impossible contradiction between either A, being like, hey, put that event there, but like, well, not every story needs an event there, and so you're being way too specific, and people can automatically tell that that does not fit, right, that they shouldn't have to do that because that's, so many stories are not doing that. Or you can get extremely vague and be like, oh, but I meant that metaphorically. It's metaphorical death. It's a metaphorical journey.
Right.
It's a metaphorical despair, or whatever you want. And then it's so vague, it could literally mean anything. And so people might be inspired by it and might be like, oh, I've got an idea for like a metaphorical death I could do here. But now it's no longer meaningful in any way because you could make anything match that.
Right. And what's funny is that sometimes, like, people will get really vague about even these bizarrely over-specific ones. Like, again, this is sort of the big difference between Snyder's Save the Cat and Brody's Save the Cat. Because Snyder's Save the Cat is just hyper-specific to a bizarre degree. But people still, like, say, like, oh yeah, I wrote this with Save the Cat, and you look at it, and you're like, where is any of the weird stuff that Snyder was talking about? I'm like, well, it's there as, like, a metaphor of the thing he was talking about. Whereas, like, Brody kind of cuts out the middleman and is like, yeah, all of these really weird claims that Snyder made, they're all real, but also they can be anything. So, don't worry about it. You can write anything and then say you're following Brody's version of the Save the Cat, because the steps are all so incredibly vague.
Well, the thing it has to do is that it has to say that all these stories that you like fall into this structure. And so when it's being used that way, the definitions of each of these moments has to be broad enough that you can slot in, like, House of Cards Episode 1 and The Emperor's New Groove.
Yeah, because those are both good things that people like.
Right. And they have to both follow the structure, but then when you're trying to give advice to people, then suddenly these structures get, like, super specific. With Snyder in particular, he's, like, giving you the pages that you need to put these things on.
Yeah, my favorite thing about Snyder's is, like, if you just tried to make a movie following Snyder's advice, it would be incomprehensible. It would be both really boring and also, like, weirdly paced. He's got, like, this 10% that's supposed to be the debate of the movie. It's like you're supposed to spend that long debating to go on the adventure, which, of course, none of the examples he cites do that, because why would they? Like, why on earth? Who thinks that's gonna make the story better?
And, like, you can have a scene where the hero debates something, sure, but to say that that's both, like, necessary and, like, obligatory is just wrong. Especially since we have many stories that start after the hero has decided to go on the adventure.
Yeah.
Or they're just fully in. There's no question.
Right, like, they don't always need to be convinced. And even for the ones who do need to be convinced, you probably aren't going to spend that long on it, right? Because it's just not that interesting.
Can you imagine if 10% of a Brandon Sanderson book was debating whether to go on the adventure?
Oh, no. Oh, God. That's like, you could fit, like, a normal person's novel in there.
Yeah, okay. About that, this is interesting because some of this idea where you have like this introductory segment comes from like Freytag, from Freytag's Pyramid,
Yeah.
and then some later books, but like a bunch of those books, if you actually look at the text of them, they're like, oh no, this should only be like a scene, or this should be as short as possible, or from, you know, Kenneth Thorpe Rowe, whose book I'm reading right now, he's like, oh, well, actually, this can happen like alongside other events if you can like work the information in later. And so they're not actually intended to be originally like this huge segment, but then you go later and you get to like Sid Field's 3-act structure, and it's like, oh yeah, this huge section, you know, 1/3 1/3 of the story should just be a whole bunch of setup,
Yeah.
you know, with maybe a few important plot points in it. And now we're just making it really long. And that's just, it's not a good idea because you're supposed to start the plot. You should start the plot as quickly as you can and then think for your individual situation if it makes sense to delay a little bit so that you can do important setup that makes it matter, for instance. But that's like, that those trade-offs are different for every story. And so just telling everyone to delay when it would only benefit a few people is not a good idea.
Well, here's the thing about Freytag's Pyramid and the 3-act structure. The thing that makes 3-act structure so bad is that it's Freytag's Pyramid bastardized by a long train of dastardly Polish people who have been plotting.
Okay, I think we need to, for listeners who have not read my post on Freytag's Pyramid, and again, most people don't recognize the term Freytag's Pyramid, but you have probably seen the simple triangle chart where there's rising action, and there's a climax in the center for some reason, and then falling action, right, at a downward slope. And people, you know, sometimes they modify it to put the climax in the place we would put it now. But that's Freytag's Pyramid, and the Freytag, who made this pyramid, really hated the Polish. Like, and he has, at the beginning of his book, because I've read it, he has an introduction where he actually does sound like a proto-Nazi. He has some, like, he's weird, he never mentions the Polish, but he has, like, a weird emphasis on races that is kind of creepy.
He's old-timey European racist. It's like, the kind of racist, like, nowadays we most, like, in America, we tend to think of racism as being between black people and white people, or white people and Asian people. Old-timey European racism is to heck with those Italians. Or, if you're Italian, to heck with those Venetians, because I'm from Naples. Right? That's the real old-timey stuff that he was big on.
But Freytag apparently circulated pamphlets talking about how they should, like, conquer Poland, except for Poland had already been conquered by Russia. So these were like, we should conquer Poland if they get free from Russia. It's like, that's a lot of effort into fantasizing about subjugating the Polish.
Don't worry, everybody. The competition between Russia and Germany for control of Eastern Europe will never cause any problems. It's fine. Don't look into it.
No. I think he does name drop the Polish people at some point in the book. I remember seeing that just to get a little dig in. Can't let them think that this book about story structure is not racist a little bit.
So, like, Freytag, it's not like everything Freytag says is wrong, but a lot of it's wrong, and then a lot of it is in very different contexts to the way that we are talking, that we tell stories now. Like, storytelling has advanced a little bit from the, like, tragic plays of the 1860s.
Yeah, again, it's just for tragedies. The part of the structure, the end, is actually supposed to be the hero dies.
Yeah.
Right? So that's one of his points, is the hero dies. So it's
Right.
It's not for non-tragedy. It really isn't. So anyway, that, again, this gets into the blurriness. Like, I know that what Freytag's trying to do, and I think it's, like, less of a pseudo-structure than something like Save the Cat is, right? Because Freytag's pyramid is still very general. I don't think it's a good structure, but I feel like he's at least trying to do what a structure is supposed to do, which is talk about the broad outlines of, like, how the story works. Whereas something like Save the Cat is very like, at this moment you do this very specific thing, and it's removed from even farther removed from what structure should be.
Yeah, Save the Cat is honestly weird. A lot of these books, I can see how they catch on, even if I don't think that what they're saying makes sense, a lot of these structures. I don't get Save the Cat. Like, especially Snyder's version. Snyder's version reads like a fever dream conveyed by the most annoying kid you knew in high school. It's so strange. Like, everything is written with these really off-putting names that don't make sense, and it's like hard to figure out what he's talking about half the time. I just don't get how this became popular. At least with Brody's version, I get how it became popular beyond the fact that it's linked to Save the Cat, because it's super vague on purpose, right? So anyone who doesn't like being told what to do can just do what they were going to do already, and then, like, retroactively fill in the part that they're doing Brody's thing. That's hard to do with Snyder's. I just don't get it. I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, remembering when I was young,
Mm-hmm.
relatively,
When I was young
and I liked Save the Cat.
and naive,
Yes.
I was still saving the cat.
I remember liking it because it just seemed fun and easy.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know what real story structure is, you never know what's missing.
That's true.
The funniest thing for me about Save the Cat is that Snyder very briefly references A plots and B plots,
Yeah.
right? Which are actual things in a story, actual structural elements in the story, but never explains what they are. It's just a passing reference.
It's so funny.
Right? And the rest of it, no reference to plot lines in this book. It's just, except for this passing reference that he doesn't explain. It's because for him, it's so second nature that he doesn't even think it's worth saying, right? And so it doesn't go in the book. Whereas Sid Field, with his screenplay, The Foundations of Screenwriting, was his book. This is the one where this, like, quote-unquote 3-act structure comes from.
Or at least the version of it that many of us are familiar with.
Yeah, I think Sid Field really was trying to communicate story structure. He just doesn't have a good intellectual understanding of it. And so, he keeps saying, oh, you need a beginning and an ending and a beginning and an ending, but he cannot pin down what they are. Right? So he'll ask some questions. Oh, well, does your character get married or divorced? Or, he'll ask questions. He's clearly looking for, like, a hook and resolution. That's clearly what he means. He doesn't know how to define it, right? For him, it's just gut level. It's instinctual. So he can't see it,
Yeah.
right? Same with, like, turning points. He has no understanding of, like, fractal structure, right? So, or how, child arcs work, right? So for him, there's a plot point that, like, twists the action around. It's like, okay, look, every single plot event in a story changes what happens going forward. They're all do that, and they can be anywhere. Right?
I mean, the point you've made before is that these structures are only useful in as far as you already understand the other storytelling fundamentals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And even then, it's like, if you understand the storytelling fundamentals, you can probably make a good story that follows these structures. Although, honestly, Save the Cat's going to be kind of a challenge. But like, you probably can. But at that point, it's just like, what are they giving to you that is worth restricting yourself like that? Why not just tell the story you want to tell at that point?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe somebody could pick up Sid Field's book and by like thinking on it really hard, kind of like, and looking at examples, come up with some better idea of hooks and resolutions, even though he never says it.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe they could start paying attention to, okay, I need to figure out what the ending is to do the beginning, and the beginning has to match the ending, and that like sets them on the wrong direction. I do think it's a step better than, for instance, the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Right? Which is just a bunch of metaphorical things that don't really try at all, right?
Yeah. I mean, the thing you have to understand about the hero's journey and the monomyth is that it's made up. Like, it's fake. Like, Campbell doesn't demonstrate it, ever.
It's like a spiritual theory of storytelling as it exists concept.
Yeah, I mean, trying to read the original Hero with a Thousand Faces is just an exercise in masochism, because Campbell's not a good writer, and what he's trying to say is extremely hard to figure out, and he's, like, just goes on, and he, like, writes in this really weird cryptic style, and then he'll make bizarre claims out of nowhere, like, all ancient cities are built on the 4 cardinal directions. It's like, that's just not true, and he just doesn't feel the need to support these claims at all.
He won't say all, he'll just say ancient cities. And you're like, that is, what do you mean? What ancient cities? Where in the world? During what time period? And so you're just left with, all ancient cities, right? And he'll make statements, and they had a temple in the center, too. Apparently ancient cities had a temple in the center and, entrances in the 4 cardinal directions. This is just how ancient cities are. So he's just a bad scholar. He's not a good scholar, and he does not actually prove his thesis in any way.
And he seems to resent the idea that he should. Like, that's just not what he's here for, okay?
Mm-hmm.
He's already figured out the answer, and now he's here to, like, make it sound mystical to you. And so it's like, it's just fake. It's just made up.
What's very funny to me is that a lot of these structures are, like, explicitly based on monomyth, Hero with a Thousand Faces, Hero's Journey, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that none of them agree with how many, like, stages there should be is something that none of them really reconcile. Like, can these all be true at once? I don't know. Does it have 3 acts? 18, like, beats? 5 acts? Like, 16 or 14 or 8?
It's very funny watching people try to reconcile these, like, completely unrelated, made-up pseudo-structures, like, trying to figure out how the 3-act structure works with the hero's journey. It's like, it doesn't. Because they're both fake. They're just fake from different directions. The 3-act structure is just made up. You can divide any story into 3 acts if you want to. There's no real reason, but you can. And like Sid Fields' version of it at least has some specific advice. It's just weird and not very good.
Yeah, Sid Field took an attention arc, right?
Mm-hmm.
And tried to express it, but like didn't know how to actually describe it. And then like built an arbitrary set of events around it, right? Like dividing the story into 3. It's like you could have 3 big child arcs, right? That each of them makes the story a little different, right? Because they're big tours and each of them spins the story in a different direction, as he would say.
Always twirling towards freedom.
That's an option a story could have. But that's a very arbitrary thing to say that every story should have, because if you don't understand the multi-leveled fractal nature of plot structure, you cannot describe where things go, because they could go anywhere.
They also don't specify, like, how long these should be. Like, if you look at the charts and diagrams of, for example, something like the story circle that are, like, meant to be visualizations, it looks like they should all last the same amount of time. But then you'll read them a little bit and it'll be like, this one can be as short as a single line. And it's like, I won't argue that huge moments that are important to the story can happen in a line or 2. Like, all right, sure. But, like, then in what sense is this a structure?
Right, why did you use a pie graph if the actual size of these things doesn't, like, relate to the pie?
Okay, his claim is that because biology. It's bullshit about, like, psychology and it's a circle because of biology. Like, I think that is what the article says. I mean, that's about what I'd expect from a structure based on Campbell, but,
Yeah, I mean, my favorite. I love story circle. It's like they return to their familiar situations. Like, do they? Why? most of the time they don't. And what is the purpose of dictating that as a requirement?
I mean, some stories do it, and it gives a sense of, like, closure,
Yeah.
right? Or revisiting the past and seeing how you've grown, right? It can be done, but it certainly doesn't have to be done, which is, again, a lot of how these pseudo-structures are, right? They don't know how to identify what real story structure is, so they only have two options. One is demanding that you include something you don't need to include, or being so vague they're not really giving you anything at all.
Right.
If I was going to express a progression as a circle, I would also, that would imply that you can start at any point on the circle, and that's also not true of the structure.
That's a good point.
It's just, it's not like other structures. Trademark.
Yeah. My favorite is when things that are not pseudo-structures get roped into this. Like, a while back I did an episode on this myth that you could avoid the need for tension and conflict in your stories by using, like, this one weird trick pseudo-structure. And the main show of that was Kisho Tenketsu, which is just a kind of harmless set of potential plot points.
And if I understand, though, this is a structure that we don't understand very well, right? Because...
Yeah. In all of my research, I could not find any well-sourced information about Kisho Tenketsu other than a set of YouTube videos by some Japanese manga creators who don't really get into it all that much. They use it as like a guide for tension in their story, basically. They don't get into the specifics that much. And like,
right. So it might be kind of similar to the 3-act structure a bit.
Or maybe not.
Point is, we don't have good English sources on this, and so that makes it hard for us to know exactly what it is.
Yeah, I'm not making any claims about the actual Kisho Tenketsu as it's used in Japan, right? I don't know how they use it there. I just know what English language blogs say about it. But the other one that I was looking at in that article was this thing called daisy chain plotting, which is not a structure. It's a concept. It's like, instead of having a single main character who you stick with for the entire story, you instead have basically a group of vignettes that all relate to the same thing. Sometimes it can be...
So I would call daisy chain somewhat a structure in that it specifies that there is a chain of vignettes. Because that is a specific structure, because you have a story that starts and ends for each vignette.
Oh.
And each of the mini-stories follows the 3-act structure.
It's not a very specific structure, right? It just means you have, like... But if you say, hey, this story is an anthology, right? Or this story is episodic, or this story is very, serial / overarching, or whatever you want to call it, that is structural information.
Yeah.
Right? About where plot hooks start and where they end. It is very vague and broad, but I would honestly give more credit to the daisy train, right? Calling it a structure, okay, maybe vague, in a kind of vague, broad type of way.
Yeah. And I don't have any issues with daisy chain. I think that that's a perfectly legitimate way to tell a story. There are certainly trade-offs, right? There's a reason why we tend to stick with a single main character. But if that's the kind of story you want to do, like, that's totally doable. It isn't going to do any of these things that the people often claim that it will. Like, it's not going to take...
It doesn't get rid of conflict and tension.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with those things. Daisy chain seems perfectly fine, and it's being used as, like, this weird, like, like, prop in this fight that some authors have against the need to put tension in their story. It's like, Daisy Chain didn't ask for this. It's just a neat little story concept.
Can we take a moment to appreciate just how bizarre Virgin's Promise is? Like, man, a moment of silence for the fact that we are talking about versions like that's not a bizarre misogynistic concept in 2020.
Yeah, that's...
when that article came out.
That's just... It's like, supposedly... It's one of those things where, like, the person writing it is like, no, this doesn't have to be about gender. Like, anyone can be any of these roles. And it's like, okay, but, like, why did you name the Dark Reflection the whore? Like,
Ooh.
Did you have to do that? I don't think anyone made you do that.
Here's a line I pulled from it. Just as females can be heroes, males can be versions, whether or not they are gay.
Yeah, I mean...
Thanks.
That's technically true.
Somebody's trying.
True in the literal sense.
and failing to be sensitive.
It's also nothing I could find in that, and admittedly I just skimmed it because, yeah, I didn't feel like I wanted to spend a lot of time on that article. I don't think that the virgin ever explicitly has to make a promise, nor do they have to be a virgin.
It's just, I mean, it's sort of like the most obvious example of that thing I talked about earlier, where this isn't telling you what needs to be in a story. It's telling you some things that could be in a story. Like, you could make, because I would say, like, if you ignore the weird, like, virgin whore language, this is sort of about a story with the idea that it's about a woman who is under pressure to do feminine coded things and, like, wants to do masculine coded things and then has to, like, reconcile those things. Sure, you can tell a story about that if you want to. There's nothing wrong with that. Plenty of good stories are about that. But calling it a structure is weird, because this doesn't really tell you what needs to be in there. It's just a list of inspiration ideas, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It's a feminine plot. That's also what
No.
the article calls it.
Oh, no.
I also don't know if it's related at all to the heroine's journey, which I don't know if that's the same thing or something else.
Yeah, I mean, what Oren was just saying sounds like Maureen Murdoch's heroine's journey.
It's similar. It's very similar.
Right, yeah, I mean, and it's basically, I wrote about it back when I was actually more into the hero's journey, and then I learned better. But at the same time, it was, if you want your character to go through growth and have big change, it can offer inspiration for doing that, is basically what I would say about it now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I suppose you could say there are kind of some emotional structure, and that there are periods in which the character appears to be learning, and that would take tension down, right? And then having problems again, which would take tension up.
Yeah.
Right? But it's mostly, I would say, just for inspiration.
I mean, that does seem to be the best case scenario.
Yeah, and it doesn't call anyone a whore, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
Just in general, I would be very careful about the idea of story types having genders. I'm not going to say there's never a situation where that might be useful, but you can get carried away with that almost immediately.
Yeah, I will say with Maureen Murdoch's, the thing is that, and I have not actually really clarified well in this post, is that she was a therapist for women, and so the inspiration for her was the things that she heard from her patients, right, and their emotional journeys. And so the gender in that one, the Maureen Murdoch's heroine's journey, I think of it not as prescriptive, but as descriptive, right? She's describing what a group of women went through emotionally at a particular time in response to patriarchy. And that's where her idea for this heroine's journey comes from.
Yeah. And I think there is one more thing that I think is really important about this, is that also bisexual, non-binary people can be virgins, just so we're clear.
We're all represented here. This podcast says you are valid as a virgin.
Yes, that's
We witness you.
definitely the message we want to end this on.
I think my conclusion after studying all of these pseudo-structures is that A New Hope is to blame for 99% of it.
But I love A New Hope, though, because I can use it to show people what an actual through line is. It's like, oh, you thought that A New Hope was successful because of the hero's journey. Well, guess what? It's not. Here's the actual, yeah.
Now you're gonna learn something.
I had one editing client who told me that after he read this article where I demonstrated that it, like, through example, that it wasn't the hero's journey that made it successful, but, like, just having a through line, that his mind was, like, blown.
Heck yeah.
We love to hear it.
Keep blowing those minds.
Right?
Down with pseudo-structures. That should be your takeaway.
Yeah. Alright, well, I think with that, we are gonna go ahead and call this episode to a close.
Oh, damn, we forgot to have a big row and talk about our dinners. I guess this podcast will not hit the tops of the charts.
Yeah, that'll be part 2.
Perhaps it's not a podcast at all.
We metaphorically discussed our dinners.
Yes, true.
Yeah.
If you would like us to stop and not discuss our dinners, you can consider supporting us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/mythcreants.
And before we go, I want to thank a couple of our existing patrons. First, there's Amon Jaber. He's an urban fantasy writer and a connoisseur of Marvel. Then there's Kathy Ferguson, who's a professor of political theory in Star Trek. We will talk to you next week.
There was a dragon with a pointy tail. He was bigger than a whale, and his breath was terrible. He scared the princess when he came around. Tried to burn the castle down, but she caught him by his tail. Then she tied him to a tree so the dragon couldn't fly. She told him he was mean, and it made the dragon cry. When he finally apologized, she offered him some tea. He accepted it graciously. Now he visits every weekend with the princess who saved herself.
This has been the Mythcreant Podcast. Opening closing theme, The Princess Who Saved Herself by Jonathan Colton.